In March 2023, 32-year-old software developer Michael Torres made what seemed like an ordinary purchase, a used laptop from an online marketplace for $200. He needed a backup computer for work, nothing more. But when he powered it on for the first time, what appeared on the screen stopped him cold. The desktop wallpaper wasn't a scenic landscape or abstract design. It was a missing person poster. The face staring back at him belonged to a young woman named Sarah Chen, last seen 14 months earlier. What Michael discovered next would unravel a mystery that investigators had nearly given up on and reveal a truth far darker than anyone had imagined. Chapter 1. The Discovery. Michael Torres was not the kind of person who took unnecessary risks. As a software developer working remotely from Austin, Texas, he approached most decisions with careful consideration. When his primary work laptop began showing signs of hardware failure in early March 2023, he decided to purchase a backup device rather than wait for a catastrophic breakdown. He turned to a popular online marketplace where individuals sold used electronics. The listings were plentiful, but one caught his attention: a 3-year-old laptop with decent specifications being sold for $200. The seller, identified only as D. Morrison, had minimal information in their profile. The listing description was brief, stating the device was in good working condition and came with a charger. No elaborate story, no explanation for the sale. Michael messaged the seller, arranged a meeting at a public coffee shop, and completed the transaction without incident. D. Morrison was a middle-aged man, quiet and unremarkable, who handed over the laptop in its original box and left without much conversation. The entire exchange took less than 10 minutes. Looking back, Michael would remember how the seller seemed eager to complete the sale quickly, barely making eye contact and declining Michael's offer to test the laptop before finalizing payment. Back at his apartment, Michael plugged in the device and pressed the power button. The screen illuminated, and the operating system loaded without issue. Everything seemed perfectly normal until the desktop appeared. There, filling the entire screen, was an image that made Michael's breath catch. It was a missing person poster. The design was unmistakable, a large photograph of a young woman in her mid-20s, with dark hair and a warm smile. Below the image, bold text read, "Missing Sarah Chen." Underneath were details: age 26, last seen January 15th, 2022, in Seattle, Washington. A phone number for tips was listed at the bottom. Michael stared at the screen, trying to process what he was seeing. Why would someone use a missing person poster as their desktop wallpaper? Was it a family member? A friend trying to keep the case visible? Or is there something more disturbing at play? He opened the laptop's browser history. It had been wiped clean. The documents folder was empty. Every application appeared to have been uninstalled or reset to default settings. Whoever had prepared this laptop for sale had made an effort to remove personal data, but they had forgotten one critical detail: the wallpaper. Michael took a photo of the screen with his phone, then performed a reverse image search. Within seconds, results appeared. Sarah Chen was indeed a real missing person. News articles from Seattle area outlets detailed her disappearance. She had been a graduate student studying environmental science at the University of Washington. On the evening of January 15th, 2022, she left her apartment to meet a friend for dinner. She never arrived. Her phone went dark. Her bank accounts showed no activity. Surveillance footage captured her entering a parking garage near her apartment building, but there was no footage of her leaving. The case had generated significant media attention in the weeks following her disappearance. Search parties combed through parks and wooded areas. Investigators interviewed friends, classmates, and family members. But as weeks turned into months with no new leads, the coverage dwindled. By March 2023, Sarah Chen's case had gone cold. Michael spent the next hour reading every article he could find. Sarah had been passionate about climate research and had volunteered at local environmental organizations. Her professors described her as dedicated and brilliant. Her friends spoke of someone who was cautious and responsible, not the type to vanish without warning. The mystery of her disappearance had left her family devastated and searching for answers that never came. Michael sat in his apartment, the glow of the laptop screen casting shadows across his face. He was holding a device that, for reasons he could not yet understand, had a direct connection to a missing woman. The question was no longer whether he should get involved. The question was what he would find if he did. He reached for his phone and dialed the tip line listed on the poster. Chapter 2. The Digital Trail. The detective who answered Michael's call was skeptical at first. Tips on cold cases came in regularly, and most led nowhere. But when Michael explained what he had found, the tone shifted. Within 24 hours, 2 investigators from the Seattle Police Department contacted him directly. Detective Laura Bennington and her partner, Detective James Carr, had been assigned to Sarah Chen's case from the beginning. They had chased every lead, interviewed dozens of people, and analyzed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage. Despite their efforts, the case had stalled. Sarah had seemingly vanished without a trace. Michael provided them with the seller's information, the name D. Morrison, the online marketplace account, and the coffee shop where the transaction had occurred. He also shipped the laptop to Seattle, where a forensic team could examine it thoroughly. The forensic analysis began immediately. Technicians worked to recover deleted files, examine metadata, and trace the laptop's digital footprint. What they uncovered was more significant than anyone had anticipated. Buried in the hard drive's unallocated space were fragments of deleted files. Among them were photographs, document drafts, and internet search histories that had not been completely erased. The photos were mundane at first glance: city streets, coffee shops, university buildings. But one detail stood out. Several images had been taken in Seattle, and the timestamps placed them within the weeks leading up to Sarah's disappearance. More troubling were the search queries recovered from the browser cache. Whoever had used this laptop had research topics that sent a chill through the investigative team. How to disable phone tracking, methods for cleaning crime scenes, and the decomposition rates of organic material in various environments. The searches had been conducted in the months before Sarah vanished, creating a disturbing timeline that suggested premeditation. Then came the breakthrough. Embedded in the metadata of one photograph was a geolocation tag. The image had been taken on January 14, 2022, just one day before Sarah disappeared. The location was a residential street in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Seattle. Detectives cross-referenced the address with their existing case files. It did not belong to anyone previously connected to Sarah's disappearance. The property was registered to a man named Derek Morrison, age 43, who worked as an accountant and had no prior criminal record. Derek Morrison, Demolison, the seller of the laptop. Detective Bennington and Detective Carr obtained a warrant and visited the address. The house was a modest single-story structure with an overgrown lawn and drawn curtains. When they knocked, no one answered. Neighbors reported that Morrison had moved out abruptly about 2 months earlier, leaving no forwarding address. One neighbor mentioned that Morrison had always been polite but distant, someone who kept to himself and rarely engaged in conversation. Investigators entered the property. The interior was largely empty, but signs of hasty departure were evident. Furniture remained in some rooms, and the kitchen still contained unopened food items. In the garage, forensic teams discovered faint traces of luminol-reactive substances, suggesting the presence of blood that had been cleaned. The pattern indicated an attempt to erase evidence, but enough remained for testing. Further analysis of a laptop revealed another critical piece of evidence: a series of encrypted files that, once decrypted, contained personal information about Sarah Chen, her class schedule, her regular routes between home and campus, and even photographs of her that appeared to have been taken without her knowledge. Some images showed her walking to class, sitting in a library, or leaving work. The collection painted a picture of someone who had been studied, tracked, and watched for an extended period. The pattern was clear. Derek Morrison had not simply known Sarah Chen. He had been watching her. Investigators issued a warrant for Morrison's arrest, but locating him proved difficult. He had abandoned his home, closed his bank accounts, and disappeared. His employer reported that he had resigned without notice in early January, just after selling the laptop to Michael Torres. His colleagues described him as competent but withdrawn, someone who completed his work efficiently, but never formed meaningful relationships. The laptop, intended to be a discarded piece of evidence, had instead become the key to unraveling the case. But there was still one question that remained unanswered. Where was Sarah Chen? Chapter 3. The Connection. As the investigation into Derek Morrison intensified, detectives worked to construct a timeline of his movements and connections to Sarah Chen. What emerged was a portrait of obsession that had been hidden in plain sight. Morrison had no direct relationship with Sarah. They did not work together, attend the same social circles, or share mutual friends. But investigators discovered that he had been a frequent visitor to the university library where Sarah often studied. Surveillance footage from the months preceding her disappearance showed Morrison entering the library on multiple occasions, always during hours when Sarah was known to be there. Witnesses who were re-interviewed began to recall details they had not considered significant at the time. A librarian remembered a man who seemed to linger near the environmental science section, often watching students rather than reading. A classmate of Sarah's mentioned seeing an unfamiliar person sitting in his car across the street from the campus coffee shop where Sarah worked part-time. These observations, initially dismissed as harmless, now took on a sinister meaning. The pieces were fitting together, but the most crucial evidence came from Morrison's digital footprint. Investigators obtained record from his email accounts and discovered that he had created multiple fake social media profiles. Using these profiles, he had attempted to connect with Sarah online, sending friend requests and messages under various false identities. Sarah had ignored or blocked most of them, seemingly unaware that they all originated from the same person. The profiles used different names and photos, but forensic analysis traced them all back to Morrison's IP address. Morrison's obsession had escalated over time. His search history revealed increasingly disturbing queries. How to approach someone who does not know you, how to make someone trust you, and eventually, how to make someone disappear. The progression showed a mind fixated on control and possession, willing to cross boundaries that most would never consider. Detectives also uncovered financial records showing that Morrison had rented a storage unit in a neighboring county. The rental agreement had been signed under a false name, but payment records traced back to one of his accounts. A search warrant was obtained, and investigators descended on the facility. Inside the unit, they found items that confirmed their worst fears. There were personal belongings that matched descriptions of things Sarah had been carrying the night she disappeared: a backpack, a jacket, and a pair of shoes. But there was no sign of Sarah herself. Forensic analysis of the items revealed traces of Morrison's DNA, linking him definitively to the evidence. The storage unit also contained tools, cleaning supplies, and a detailed handwritten journal that documented Morrison's fixation on Sarah. The entries were chilling, chronicling his observations of her daily routines, his fantasies about a relationship with her, and eventually, his plans to take her. The journal entries became more erratic and desperate as the dates progressed. Morrison wrote about feelings of rejection when Sarah blocked his fake profiles, about anger that she did not recognize what he believed was their destined connection. The writing revealed a man detached from reality, unable to accept that his feelings were not reciprocated. The final entry, dated January 15th, 2022, was brief: tonight. It has to be tonight. With this evidence, the case against Morrison was undeniable. But despite extensive searches of his former properties, the storage unit, and surrounding areas, Sarah's whereabouts remained unknown. Investigators theorized that Morrison had moved her to a secondary location, but without his cooperation, finding her would be nearly impossible. A nationwide manhunt was launched. Morrison's photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country. Media coverage of the case reignited, with Sarah's family pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Her mother appeared on local news programs, her voice trembling as she begged for answers. Then, in late April 2023, a tip came in from a small town in Oregon. A motel clerk reported that a guest matching Morrison's description had checked in under a false name. Local police surrounded the motel, and Morrison was taken into custody without resistance. When officers entered his room, They found him sitting calmly, as if he had been expecting them. He was extradited to Seattle, where he faced charges of kidnapping. But even in custody, Morrison refused to speak. He invoked his right to remain silent and provided no information about what had happened to Sarah. Chapter 4. The Truth Revealed. Derek Morrison's silence created a frustrating standstill. Prosecutors had enough evidence to charge him with kidnapping and potentially other crimes, but without Sarah's location, the case felt incomplete. Her family remained in agonizing limbo, knowing that the man responsible was in custody but unable to bring their daughter home. Detective Bennington refused to give up. She returned to the evidence, reviewing every detail, searching for anything that might reveal where Morrison had taken Sarah. The journal entries, the photographs, the search histories. Every piece of data was examined again. Sleep became secondary to the pursuit of answers. Bennington felt a personal responsibility to Sarah's family, a determination to provide them with closure. One entry in Morrison's journal stood out. It referenced a place he called the cabin, mentioned only twice and never with specific details. Investigators cross-referenced his financial records and discovered a cash withdrawal made 2 days before Sarah's disappearance in a rural area roughly 80 miles northeast of Seattle. Detectives contacted the local sheriff's department in that region and requested assistance in identifying properties Morrison might have accessed. Tax records revealed that Morrison's late father had owned a small, isolated cabin in the heavily forested hills. The property had been in the family for decades, but was rarely used. A team of investigators and search and rescue personnel made the journey to the cabin. The structure was hidden among dense trees, accessible only by an overgrown dirt road. It appeared abandoned, with boarded windows and a sagging roof. The isolation of the location was profound. No neighbors for miles, no passing traffic, no witnesses. When they entered, the air was stale and thick with silence. The interior was sparse, a single room with basic furniture, a wood stove, and little else. But in the corner, beneath a pile of old blankets, they found something that confirmed their worst fears. Sarah Chen's remains were discovered in a concealed crawl space beneath the cabin floor. Forensic analysis determined that she had died within hours of her abduction. Morrison had brought her to the cabin, and whatever had transpired there had ended her life. Whether her death was intentional or the result of panic and violence, the evidence could not fully determine. The discovery brought a heartbreaking conclusion to a case that had haunted investigators for over a year. Sarah's family, devastated by the confirmation of her death, at least had answers. They could bring her home, hold a funeral, and begin the painful process of mourning. Derek Morrison was charged with first-degree murder. In the face of overwhelming evidence, his legal team advised him to accept a plea agreement. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing, Sarah's mother stood before the court and spoke directly to Morrison. She did not scream or demand explanations. Instead, she described her daughter's kindness, her dreams, and the future that had been stolen from her. She spoke of birthdays that would never be celebrated, of grandchildren who would never exist, of a brilliant mind silenced before it could fulfill its potential. Morrison sat silently, showing no visible emotion, his face an unreadable mask. For Michael Torres, the man who had unknowingly purchased a piece of the puzzle, the resolution was bittersweet. He had hoped that his discovery would lead to Sarah being found alive. Instead, it had confirmed a tragedy. But investigators assured him that without his call, Morrison might never have been caught, and Sarah's family might never have found closure. Michael attended the sentencing, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, a witness to the conclusion of a story he had inadvertently helped write. The case became a reminder of how easily predators can hide in plain sight, how obsession can turn deadly, and how even the smallest overlooked detail can unravel the truth. Sarah Chen's story ended in darkness, but the light shed by a forgotten laptop wallpaper ensured that justice was finally served. In the end, a $200 purchase and a single overlooked image brought answers to a family that had waited in agony, proving that sometimes the most crucial evidence comes from the most unexpected places. Sarah Chen's case stands as a chilling reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself with obvious warning signs. Derek Morrison lived an ordinary life, held a respectable job, and blended seamlessly into his community. Yet beneath that unremarkable surface existed a predator who studied his victim for months, planned meticulously, and nearly escaped justice entirely. What makes this case particularly haunting is how close Morrison came to disappearing without consequence. If Michael Torres had not noticed that wallpaper, if he had simply restored the laptop to factory settings without looking, or if he had dismissed what he saw as unimportant, Morrison would still be free today. Sarah's family would still be waiting for answers that would never come. This story proves that the smallest details can change everything. A forgotten image, a single phone call, one person choosing to get involved instead of looking away. Michael Torres was not a detective or an investigator. He was an ordinary person who saw something wrong and chose to act. That decision brought justice to a family devastated by loss and ensured that a dangerous individual could never harm anyone again. If this investigation resonated with you, or if you believe stories like Sarah's deserve to be told, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue exploring cases that might otherwise be forgotten, shining light on the missing, and honoring those who can no longer speak for themselves. Share this video to spread awareness, because you never know when the smallest action might make the biggest difference.